Most people around us have stopped questioning. The world has become so loud, so fast, and so saturated with information that the human mind, once a powerful tool for inquiry and growth, has dulled into passive acceptance. What happens to a society where critical thinking vanishes, where reasoning and reflection are replaced by instant reactions, surface-level opinions, and collective echo chambers? This is the disturbing truth behind the disappearance of critical thinking and the dangerous rise of what philosophers now call collective stupidity, a phenomenon where masses of people adopt shallow thinking, blindly accept narratives, and surrender their intellectual independence without even realizing it. The most urgent truth we must confront is whether we reclaim our minds or lose them entirely to a system designed to keep us comfortably numb. Thinking is hard, and in today's world, it is often discouraged. The modern environment does not reward contemplation. It rewards speed, emotional response, and conformity. And this is not by accident. From algorithms that feed you only what you want to hear, to educational systems that prioritize memorization over exploration, society is actively conditioning us away from critical thought. Philosopher Noam Chomsky warned about this decades ago, explaining how power structures rely on what he called the manufacturing of consent. When people are trained to consume without questioning, to agree without understanding, they become easy to manage and even easier to deceive. Critical thinking, once considered a fundamental human skill, is now seen as inconvenient. It challenges ideologies and dares to ask one simple but dangerous question: is this really true? One of the key drivers of this decline is the information overload we experience daily. According to neuroscientist Daniel Levitin, the average person today processes 5 times more information per day than they did just a few decades ago. Our minds were not built for this kind of input. When the brain is overwhelmed, it shortcuts. It relies on mental habits, cognitive biases, and groupthink to navigate complexity. Rather than evaluating ideas critically, it looks for cues from peers, influencers, or perceived authorities. This is called social proof, and while it is a natural survival mechanism, it can be easily manipulated. People are not unintelligent. They are being conditioned to follow signals instead of reason. And that distinction makes all the difference in understanding how collective stupidity spreads so effortlessly through modern society. His concern was not just ignorance, but the erosion of our ability to think critically about the systems we depend on. Neuroscientist Mary Ann Wolfe describes how our brains are being rewired by digital media. We now skim more, jump between tabs, and struggle to maintain focus on longer texts. But critical thinking requires sustained attention. You cannot analyze, reflect, or truly understand if your attention span is constantly fractured. Ask yourself, when was the last time you read an entire article without checking your phone? When was the last time you paused after hearing something provocative to think rather than react? These small habits, once common, are vanishing. As Carl Sagan once warned, we live in a society exquisitely dependent on science and technology in which hardly anyone knows anything about science and technology. And when they stop questioning, they become vulnerable to manipulation and propaganda. It is also deeply emotional. Critical thinking is uncomfortable. It forces us to admit we do not know everything. It challenges our egos and leads us into cognitive dissonance, where cherished beliefs clash with new evidence. In a culture that values certainty, confidence, and identity above all else, this is deeply threatening. So instead of thinking, we defend. We retreat into our tribes, repeat mantras, cancel, and avoid. To understand the roots of this collective decline, we must look beyond the surface and trace how certain systems have evolved not to nurture critical thought, but to suppress it. John Taylor Gatto, an award-winning teacher and outspoken critic of traditional schooling, argued that modern education does not exist to create independent thinkers. He claimed that compulsory schooling was designed during the industrial age not to enlighten students, but to prepare them for factory life, predictable, obedient, and non-disruptive. Instead of teaching how to think, we are taught what to think. From early ages, children are evaluated not on the originality of their thoughts, but on their ability to memorize and conform. Curiosity is treated as a distraction, and over time the message becomes clear. Follow the rules, color inside the lines, and do not ask too many questions. This pattern does not end in school. It intensifies in adult life. In the workplace, in media, even in friendships, we learn that questioning consensus can cost us socially. The fear of exclusion, of being labeled difficult or controversial, is often enough to silence even our most pressing doubts. Psychologist Erich Fromm observed this in his book Escape from Freedom, explaining how many people secretly want to surrender their freedom of thought because true freedom comes with responsibility, and responsibility can be terrifying. Thinking for yourself means you can no longer blame others for your ignorance. You must face the uncertainty of truth, and for many, that is too great a burden. So instead, we choose comfort, distraction, and simplicity over complexity, and in doing so, we become easier to control by the very systems that benefit from our intellectual surrender. Social media has accelerated this problem to unimaginable levels. What was once a space for global connection has become a battlefield of opinion wars, outrage cycles, and algorithmic manipulation. Every platform is designed to keep you scrolling, reacting, and consuming, not thinking. You are nudged constantly toward content that confirms your beliefs and encouraged to respond instantly, emotionally, and often angrily. Platforms reward engagement, not truth. They thrive on division, not understanding. Philosopher Marshall McLuhan foresaw this in the 1960s, warning that the medium is the message, meaning the way we receive information changes how we think. Today's mediums encourage speed over depth, outrage over nuance, and certainty over humility. Even truth itself has become distorted. What is true often matters less than what is viral, and people no longer evaluate ideas based on evidence, but on how many others agree. It was an invitation to stay curious, keep asking, and remain intellectually humble in the face of a vast and mysterious world that rewards those willing to seek truth. We begin by asking better questions. Questions that challenge the status quo and demand real answers, not slogans stripped of context. What are you being told to believe? Who benefits from that belief? What assumptions lie beneath your certainty? How often do you seek out opposing views not to attack them, but to understand them? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary. The antidote to collective stupidity is not just intelligence. They prime us with repeated narratives until we accept them as truth, not because we verified them, but because they feel familiar. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman showed that our brains operate using two systems, one fast and instinctive, the other slow and deliberate. The fast system jumps to conclusions, makes snap judgments, and conserves energy. The slow system is thoughtful and analytical, but requires effort. In our high-speed, always-on world, most people are stuck in fast mode. There is simply no time or will to slow down and think deeply. This is fertile ground for mass manipulation. Politicians, marketers, and media outlets all understand how to exploit our mental shortcuts. Yet history shows that progress has always come from those who dared to think differently, regardless of the personal cost they paid. This is known as confirmation bias, and it is one of the most powerful cognitive traps in existence. How often do you seek out evidence that contradicts your beliefs? How often do you truly listen to opposing arguments rather than preparing your counterpoint? If you are honest, probably not as often as you think. Another key concept is groupthink, a psychological phenomenon where the desire for harmony leads to irrational decisions. Social psychologist Irving Janis found that even highly intelligent, well-intentioned people can make catastrophic decisions when they suppress dissent and avoid critical evaluation. Challenging the group feels unsafe. Going against the grain requires more than intelligence. It requires integrity and courage. One of the greatest losses is the habit of inner dialogue, the ability to sit with a question, explore it honestly, and allow truth to emerge through genuine reflection. It is an act of rebellion. You risk being misunderstood, ostracized, even hated. But you also gain something invaluable: clarity, self-respect, and the quiet power that comes from knowing your beliefs are truly yours, not programmed into you. Galileo, Darwin, and Martin Luther King were all rejected or attacked for their ideas, but they thought anyway. They spoke anyway, and their willingness to challenge collective ignorance shaped the world we live in today. So why do so many of us feel lost and anxious, even with access to more information than any generation before? The answer lies not in what we have, but in what we have lost. We can start by cultivating awareness of our mental habits, awareness of the sources we consume, and awareness of when we are thinking versus simply reacting. One powerful practice is metacognition, thinking about our thinking. Ask yourself, what is influencing my opinion right now? Am I open to being wrong? Am I engaging with this idea or just absorbing it passively? Another is the deliberate practice of dialectical thinking, the ability to hold two opposing ideas in tension while exploring them. This is not just intellectual flexibility, it is mental strength. It allows you to move beyond binaries, beyond us versus them, and into the realm where real understanding is born. As philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti said, "To understand the immeasurable, the mind must be extraordinarily quiet." That stillness, so rare in our age, is precisely where the seeds of wisdom and genuine understanding grow. At the heart of this entire crisis, beneath the digital noise, the failing institutions, and the cultural polarization, there is something even more insidious. The real reason critical thinking is disappearing is not because people are incapable of it, but because they are afraid of what it might reveal. To think critically is to risk everything that gives us psychological safety, our identity, our beliefs, our tribe. And for many, those things are too precious to question. We live in an age where identity has become sacred. People define themselves by their opinions and affiliations. To challenge an idea is now seen as a personal attack. But this is precisely the illusion that destroys thought, the belief that we are our ideas. You are not your political party. You are not your ideology. You are a human being with the capacity to evolve, learn, and change through honest self-examination. Facing our inner world is the very essence of thinking, and it begins with one honest question. Critical thinking is not just an intellectual skill. It is a spiritual act. It is the act of honoring truth over comfort, growth over certainty, and freedom over approval. It is the quiet decision to live with your eyes open, even when the light burns. Because once you start thinking critically, you begin to see the structures that surround you, the systems of manipulation, the algorithms of control, and the masks people wear. It can be overwhelming, it can even be painful, but it is real. And reality, no matter how uncomfortable, is the only foundation upon which true freedom can be built. Because no school, no system, and no social media platform will ever do this work for you. It is about questioning yourself. It is about asking, why do I believe what I believe? Where did this idea come from? What parts of me are afraid to let go of it? When you ask those questions honestly, a new world opens. Not just a world of knowledge, but of wisdom. And wisdom is what our society is starving for. In a culture addicted to quick answers, wisdom invites deeper questions. When you rise to the responsibility of thinking for yourself, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see with clarity. You begin to feel what it is like to live in alignment with truth, not borrowed truth, not popular truth, but your own hard-earned truth. You start seeing the difference between information and propaganda, between education and indoctrination, between connection and performance. And most importantly, you begin to lead. Not with noise, not with ego, but with depth. You become a light in a dark room, a voice of reason in a storm of outrage, a grounded thinker in a world of reactionaries. This is what the world needs now more than ever. Not louder voices, not sharper arguments, but deeper minds, willing to sit in complexity and say, I do not know, but I am willing to learn and grow. Let that person be you. It is a symptom of fear, of fatigue, of a world too distracted to look inward. But every act of thinking clearly pushes back against that tide. Every moment you pause to reflect instead of react. Every time you ask a question instead of assuming the answer. Every time you choose clarity over comfort, you reclaim your power. The most revolutionary thing you can do right now is not to shout, not to conform, not to repeat, but to think. Let others sleepwalk through slogans and screens. Let them trade their freedom for validation.